Welcome back to the Elias Makos Show in the third hour of this program. Now, thousands of foreign caregivers are facing uncertainty in this country as the federal government delays the launch of new permanent residency pathways. The delay leaves many workers, think of nannies, think of other home support staff, leaves them with very few options. One is you can leave the country, or you can stay in the country undocumented. And we know demand for services remains high. So what's happening when it comes to those caregivers right now? Let's find out a little bit more. Herbert Brownstein's with us, immigration lawyer, also a longtime city councilor in DDO from 2005 to 2021. Herbert, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Elias, for having me today.
So, listen, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Tell me about the clients coming to you.
Yeah, well, I do get both the caregivers coming to me who are already in Canada as well as the employers. And they're really in a panic situation because did you know that Montreal is the only place in Canada right now where you cannot hire an in-home childcare worker at the regular wage, which starts at $15.75 an hour. Legault announced on August 20th, and it came in on September the 3rd, that there's a 6-month freeze, and it only applies to Montreal to hire a child caregiver. And if the child caregiver's work permit is expiring within the 6-month freeze, you can't even renew the work permit at the current wage of $15.75. You got to bump it up to $33, which is a high wage.
That's right. He made some change, and it was related to wage. Like it had to be above the median or something like that when it came to determining how much money the wage had to be, right?
Exactly, because prior to the freeze, we'll call it a freeze, you could pay a child caregiver who looks after your children when the family works, have a father and mother. You could pay them $15.75 minimum an hour, and but he lobbied the Canadian government to freeze the temporary foreign worker program, and particularly in Montreal. If you live in Sherbrooke or Laval or Quebec City or outside the island of Montreal, there's no freeze. You can hire a child caregiver to look after your children. So why is he focusing on Montreal, and why is he preventing families who desperately need these caregivers to look after them children from hiring them at a normal wage? This is an issue that has a direct impact on young families, status of women, as well as single parents, fathers and mothers of young children who are in the workplace and where daycare facilities are grossly insufficient to meet their needs. Because these parents, either they work in the evenings or off hours, or they travel away on business, and they desperately need in-home caregivers to look after their children so they can work.
Is this an example of where maybe the government needed to do something, but they chose an axe instead of a scalpel in order to figure out what to do, and now we're seeing all of these unintended consequences? Or do you believe this was fully the intention of the government?
No, I think they acted rapidly. The Quebec government acted rapidly. There were too many temporary foreign workers in Quebec, and Quebec couldn't absorb all these workers. We had a housing crisis. There was insufficient social safety net to accommodate all these workers. But then they took an axe and just cut it without looking at which temporary foreign workers should we exempt from the freeze and which we should include. Mm-hmm. Now, the federal government also initially did not exempt child caregivers, but then they quickly came to the realization that they need to exempt certain categories of low-wage workers, and they include caregivers who look after parents and grandparents who have a medical condition or a child with a medical condition. They're called caregivers that look after individuals with high medical needs. Those are exempt. They're also exempt in Montreal and in Quebec, but they decided also that an essential worker is also a child caregiver who looks after healthy children. Only Legault doesn't recognize that, and only Legault has kept the freeze on for child caregivers in Montreal. Nowhere else in Quebec and nowhere else in Canada is there such a freeze for child caregivers. So there's no rhyme and reason for this.
So what is happening in light of all this? Are caregivers just skirting the rules right now? Are they staying in the country, working under the table? What are you seeing with how these caregivers are dealing with this?
The ones that are here, the ones whose work permits are expiring, the employer is either forced to let them go or forced for a short-term period to up their wage to $33. But most employers cannot pay those kind of wages.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a problem, and it's putting employers and their caregivers in limbo. And I'm talking about even the ones that are already here. At the very least, he should have provided an exemption for caregivers that are already on work permits working for families in the Montreal region.
Are there loopholes? And I'm just trying to think, this just came into my mind. Well, okay, the wages more than doubled to $33 plus an hour. Can you just fudge the numbers? Tell someone, oh yeah, we're paying them $33, but you're paying them for half of the hours, and then it evens. Are there just massive loopholes anyways to this?
The only loophole that you can have is you can reduce the number of hours that the caregiver is working from 40 to 30. You have to keep them on a full-time basis in order to qualify for a work permit.
Gotcha.
So you'd have to pay 30 hours times 33. It's still quite a bit of change that you would have to pay your caregiver for. So that's why we are lobbying. The immigration lawyers and the caregiving agencies and the immigration bar is lobbying, and we've sent submissions to the Quebec government to remove or to add an exemption for child caregivers, just like they've done for caregivers who serve individuals with medical needs, because we consider them to be an essential service.
Let me ask you this, and on the need, okay? I'm sure there are people that would argue, well, you know what? There are people in this country that would do those jobs. There's a huge amount of unemployment among youth, by the way. We haven't seen numbers like this in 10 years, especially when it comes to youth. Perhaps, you think of babysitters and that kind of thing. What do you say to someone that says, well, no matter, there are other people that are available to do these jobs, and that the government should go through and keep going with their program, with their intentions?
It's simply not true, and the facts show this, because in order to hire a caregiver, you have to go through a certain process. You have to go to Service Canada, and you have to advertise for 30 days. So all the Canadian employers who are seeking caregivers have advertised for 30 days and more on 3 job websites, asking Canadians and permanent residents to fill these jobs. And we get no interest. Canadians and permanent residents are not interested in working in people's homes doing this type of work. That's why they are approved under the Labor Market Impact Assessment Program, because it's already been demonstrated. There are no Canadians who want to do this work.
Is there a timeline for you as to when this situation goes from bad to worse?
Well, it's only going to get worse unless the government of Quebec lifts the moratorium, and it's coming. They did the suspension for 6 months. We're coming to the expiration date on March the 4th. I would hope they would come to their senses, and that they would add child caregivers to the group of temporary foreign workers, low wage, who are exempt from not being processed.
It's curious that you have this measure, and it applies to the island of Montreal, but not Laval. That does sound curious to me.
Or Longueuil, for that matter. It's so short. Now, I looked for interest. If there's any, I don't know if this is political, but it might be, because I looked at what is comprised of the island of Montreal. You have your boroughs, and you have your demerged cities. And I went to see if there's any of the districts that went CAQ, and I only found 2. One is Montreal, where Nadler Roy is the MNA, and in 2022 it went CAQ, and the other one is Pointe-Aux-Trembles, Chantal Rouleau. And I'd be very interested to hear from those 2 MNAs as to what their position is on the caregiver program.
We have to leave it there, Herbert. Thank you so much for coming on the program discussing this.
You're very welcome.
Herbert Brownstein, immigration lawyer, right there.